In this defiance, you'll find freedom to discover what you're truly made of.
Creating worlds in filmmaking and making them feel real is a difficult task as a cinematographer. The best commercials keep you immersed in the world they create from start to finish. There's so many ways to approach this, but where do you even start? In this video, I'm going to show you how you can do that by going over a narrative spec commercial we shot for On. Make sure you stick to the end, as I'll be sharing the things that worked and didn't work so you don't have to make the same mistakes we made. The first scene or world what we're going to be looking at is this clinical feeling scene of observing the main talent training. And this is something the director specifically wanted. And you can cheat this by just shooting this on a backdrop, but we wanted to bring it another step further by building this entire room. And what we're going to be starting off with is a classic technique that a lot of people do, especially when you're trying to observe something or you're really trying to focus the viewer's attention of what you're trying to feel. So in this shot, we have a slow dolly movement in, and we are building a frame with inside a frame that is very symmetrical, that gives us the 69:9 framing that we're always trying to achieve, that is just very pleasing to the eye. So we shot this piece on a combination of cameras, which is including the Ember, the FX3, and the Sony Venice, which is our main camera. And this shot, the opening shot of the piece, was a slow dolly in, and we could achieve that with the Sony Venice. And then we are shooting at a white balance of 4400 Kelvin. We do a lot of rating our camera like this because it gives us that blue world-ish look, and it pushes our whites and all the color balance of the image a little bit cooler, which we like to really push for these pieces specifically. I am shooting at the base ISO of this camera. One of them, it's just 500 EI. A lot of cameras have this dual base ISO, and the Venice has 500 and 2500. We are shooting these on the Zeiss Super Speed, so this is a very vintage lens. These lenses go all the way down to T1.3. And these lenses are kind of annoying to use because they're just so old, and the focus and the aperture rings are swapped, so the aperture rings are in the front. But these are known for their softness and very vintage but clean look when it comes to shoot pieces like this, when we're going for a little bit more raw and crunchy feel. And this scene was shot on the 35, and then usually I was shooting at a t-stop of 2.8 because a lot of these vintage lenses, when shooting at 1.3, the edges become very blurry and it's very mushy when you really look at everything that's going on. And it doesn't really give you the look that you're going for. It's very stylized and you can shoot wide open when it comes to a lot of things, but in these scenes like this, I wasn't looking for that. I was trying to keep everything in focus, as you can see with the focus here on the heart rate monitor, as well as the front foreground. So those are my camera specs that we're looking at, but now we're going to look at how we achieve something like this, especially when you're trying to achieve a white clinical scene with not a lot of lights. So in this world that we're creating, I knew I wanted to have at least one light fixture in the scene that would really give it and really sell that effect of what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's very fluorescent and very top lit. So I actually have two Titan tubes hung here, and then these are acting as my practical sources. And then we hung those on some chains that were connected to a contraption that we made with a Menace arm. So basically we made a grid that was swiveling on some connectors that connected to some pipe, and then that was connected to a crossbeam which was connected on this big arm, and then it was held down by a Mambo combo stand all the way off kind of in front of this. And then we have this weighted as well as it ratchet strapped to the actual stand. And this light fixture basically gave us the lights that really tell the story in this piece specifically. I always like to motivate my room and really motivate the light sources that are going along with this. And I really ask myself, what is the context of the piece that we're shooting? And it's this white clinical scene, so we're gonna have some fluorescent lights. I did a bunch of research into this to really see what this looked like, and a lot of people use this technique in their pieces just to have a fluorescent light picture, or sometimes they built a ceiling. But we didn't really have the resources to build an entire ceiling, so this is the alternative that I came up with. Now, the problem is if I just had that source, it would feel very only centralized. We wanted to lift the entire room. So the way that we did that is we have a light over here, and this is a Nova P300, and this is set at 5600 Kelvin, and this is at 100%. And this is just shooting directly up into the ceiling, and then this is giving me a bunch of lift on this side. When you're shooting a commercial like this and you want a look like this, you have to raise your ambient tones in your room specifically. And that's exactly what we did with this fixture. But again, I was trying to even out everything. So if we actually look at a top down of what this looks like, we are actually shooting on a cyc wall, and we're just using the resources that we had available to us. So there's that Nova, there's our talent running in the center. This is the cyc that we have. And then also we have a set of white flats that we put here. The lights are hung overhead, and then those are connected to that Mambo combo that I just said there. I was noticing at this point that we had this side of the room really lifted, but we needed more. And what I added was a Forza 500, and that is with a Fresnel. So if I kind of just draw that over here, and that has a Fresnel on it, so I can really focus and control the light. So this is a Forza. So this is equivalent to like a 600D, and then this is at 5600 Kelvin. This can't really change the lighting, so we're stuck with that. And this is set at 100%. That Forza is aimed at this side of the wall, and this light is bouncing all over to really lift the room. And you can see that little hot spot really there. And that's lifting the entire room. So beside the two Titan tubes, we really only have two lights in play here to lift the room. And then we have those two Titan tubes in play here. So if I were to draw just the specific two Titan tubes to showcase how we lit this, is that they're here and one is pointed slightly this way and the other one is pointed straight down. I use this one pointed slightly this way just to kind of add more of a backlight and highlight to her talent here. And that one is roughly set at like, I would say 70%, while the front one was only set at 10%. So this gives you that illusion that the talent is being lit by both lights, but it's mainly being backlit by that backlight and really giving you the levels and the edge light that pops and separates her from the actual background. And you notice that these are a little bit warmer, and we set these to 4000 Kelvin, kind of more of a tungsten, more of a fluorescent source, just because I want to differentiate between that. And you can see that warmness in the center of the image and the coolness as you get to the edges. I just want to differentiate the colors and what really fluorescent lights look like. There is a bunch of references that you can look at, but I wanted to have some more even color separation of what you see on her versus what this coolness that you get in the background as you go off to the edges of the image. And a tool for research that I really love to use is FrameSet. Now, FrameSet is a collection of movies, commercials, and music videos that really help you get inspired for the film that you're trying to create, and also bring together the project of the look and feel of what you're trying to create as well. So for this scene that we're looking at, which is a treadmill and training scene, so these are the things and search criteria that I'm going to exactly use that I can start pulling my references as well as inspiration from. And you can see that we have a collection of everything from narrative to commercial to something that feels high key. And this is the look that we're sort of going for when it came to the practical light fixtures that we want to implement in this. And what I love about FrameSet is how you can stay organized, and I can save this to a set specifically, and that is going to be for this project. And then now I can go to my sets, click on that, and you can see the other inspiration from everything that we looked at. So FrameSet is my go-to tool when I like to do my research, as well as build out look and feels for the project, as well as communicating with a director of what I want to do with specific commercials. If you want to use this tool for your next project, check out the link in the description to find out more. The next shot that we're going to be looking at here, you can see how we utilize those lights even more with shaping this in this specific scene. So I still have those same lights in play, but this time I'm using the Ember camera here. And this was a very difficult camera to work with because we're shooting at such a high frame rate. So at this point, I believe we were shooting at 312 FPS. So that means with a consistent shutter angle at 180 degrees, I didn't change that. We need a lot of light just to maintain the proper motion blur and everything like that. If I open up my shutter angle, this would look very smeary and it wouldn't look how we exactly wanted to look for this piece specifically. So I am shooting on the 18mm here, and this is a Super 35 camera with a Super 35 lenses. So my 18 is a kind of like a 24-25 equivalent. And then we are shooting this at 2.8 just to get the focus, as you can see the entire face. If I shot this at 1.3, you wouldn't really get everything in focus. So I really like to stop down my focus and really give it that deepness and richness. And that's just what I've learned as a cinematographer over the years. And then we still have the same lights in place. So if we were to do a top down at this point, this is our talent. The camera is here and I'm just hand holding this on a ladder. We didn't really have a set of sticks that were high enough to do this. So because I knew it was slow-mo, I knew I could just hold it on my leg and it would be more than enough for what we're doing specifically. And then we still have those two Titan tubes in play. And this one is sitting around 50% and the back one here is sitting at 100%. And that was just to differentiate a shadow side from a light side. And what I was noticing here that I wasn't getting enough wrap as well as output. This was just looking very toppy and sourcey. And I wanted to wrap the light all along her body. So what I ended up doing is bringing in an F22C, and then this is set at 5600 Kelvin. And then this is lighting my talent up fully and wrapping that light even more. And because we're shooting with a slow-mo camera, this is set at 100%, and all the rest of the lights are set at 100%, as you could see before. So that F22C is bringing that light around her body and wrapping it even more, giving all these highlights, especially in her face, and kind of differentiating between a light and a dark side. You could say that this is very lifted and this is a very low contrast ratio, but this is also consistent of what we were looking back before in this setup here. And I always ask myself of what are we shooting? What is the context of this? This is supposed to be very lifted. This is supposed to be a very highly lighted room because it's a clinical training room. And that's exactly what we did in this scene here. I still wanted shape on my talent. I still wanted a natural dark side, which you can even see down here, as you can see with the edges and the vignette that we have on that side. But this is supposed to feel lifted, and that's why we have a low contrast ratio. That's why I didn't bring in an egg or anything like that. And you can see on this side, we didn't have enough lights to bring that across the whole room, but I actually like the gradient that we have going across from light to dark. That's always like to do in my images when it comes to creating something that is deemed cinematic, is having a checkerboard or a salt and pepper when it comes to your image with light and dark parts. And this is something you always want to implement in your work, especially in these scenes here. Now, this scene and this shot specifically here, there's a lot to talk about that I want to cover. And this was supposed to feel like an isolation scene. She is basically in the middle of the race and she feels alone, that there's like no hope in sight, and that she wants to defy the odds and basically everything that everybody puts up against her. So this was a very interesting one because I tested out a lot of new things, especially lighting techniques and putting things in front of the lens that you can see on the other side here. So if we start breaking this down, we had access to an overhead truss. And in the studio specifically, it was a square that was rigged overhead. And in the center of that square, we had a 1200D pointed straight down. And this 1200D had a 150 softbox on it. And that is giving me all the light and harshness that you see here. And this is a conversation I had with the director. I'm like, yes, we can have a top light source, and this is generally to add ambient on it. But he's like, I want this to be like the main source. I want this to feel harsher coming from the back, and then a slight lift on the face when it comes to actually shooting this. I want it to be very stylized, and that's exactly what we went for. And this is something that I usually wouldn't do. The 1200D had the softbox on it. So if I kind of just draw this from a side angle, this is what the softbox is, and this is the 1200D that is rigged up on a bunch of pipe. And then our talent is here with her hands on her knees. And then this is providing that harsh backlight that you see here. And then we only had this set at like maybe 20% because it was a 1200D and you don't need a lot of output. And then we just had the grid on that, as well as the single layer diffusion that comes with the softbox. And then to give you some camera specs here, we were shooting this handheld on the Venice, and then we wanted to be a little bit more intimate here. So we're shooting on the 25mm, and this is a Super 35 mode. So this crops in a bit. And for this scene, we wanted to have a lot of distortion, that isolation feel. So we shot this at T1.3. And then also in front of the camera, so if I kind of draw the Venice body, and then we have like the lens sticking out here, we mounted 2 friction arms. I took off the matte box and added prisms to the front of the camera, so you can see this artifacts that we have here, as well as some swirling in the face and just some general details that we see when you have that push in. And then you have the lights refracting inside the prism to give us this interesting artifact that we have on the left side of the image. As you can see with the wide open, that our plane of focus is very crisp, and then the edges of the frame and the edges of her are very separated and pop, and it really adds to this isolation thing that we are trying to create here. So that 1200D is acting as our backlight here, and then I had to wrap that light a little bit in the front. I'm simply using an F22C here, and that is acting as my kind of key light to fill out the rest of the face that we have here. And it gives me a nice shadow side. Also the Rembrandt lighting, very interesting when we have here, when we talk about light and dark parts of our image, but now we have different levels of light. We have that isolation in the back, which is complete darkness. Then we have this artifact on the left, which gives us kind of a blue streak of light. We have that harsh backlight here, giving us interesting. It's harsh, but soft at the same time. It's just the levels of exposure. And then her face is slightly brought up. We don't really have a catch light here, but her eyes are blue enough to have enough interest here. We have Rembrandt lighting here, which gives us that interest on the shadow side of the face, and then a bunch of contrast and darkness in the shadow side of her face, which we're shooting into, which we always like to achieve. And this really helped for the world that we're trying to create, as well as just get the viewer to feel what she's exactly feeling. The next scene that we're going to be looking at was a very interesting one, and the final one for the piece, as she's running to this glowing door that we see throughout the entire piece. And this was VFX heavy, but we needed something that the VFX artist could start working with. And this was building basically this light door and shooting this on the track. I'm going to be looking at this shot in the sequence because I learned a lot shooting this whole entire scene, especially with the time crunch we had. We basically shot this entire commercial in one day. We only had 3 hours in this track location to get all the shots that we needed. And this was setup time as well as wrap out time. So an hour setup, an hour to get the shots, an hour to load out. And then we actually had to physically build this door. This was shot on the Sony FX3, and then we shot this at 240 frames per second. And then also this was on the 12mm Laowa. We intended this to be shot on the Ember, but then there's a lot of complications that happen on set specifically, which we're going to start looking at here. So if we kind of unveil the curtain of what this actually looked like, is we built a box here that we could hide a bunch of lights in, as well as the diffusion that we have here that was built out in VFX. And inside here, we had a 1200D, a Nova P300. Now this location didn't provide a lot of information when it came to electrical, and we tried to separate everything on different sockets. But what ended up happening is we had everything lit, everything ready to go, and we sparked both of these lights, and we knew that we're going to be pushing it, so we put these both at 50%. And these are common lights that you can use in any old electrical house outlet, but you just generally want to have them on different circuits. And then at 50%, we had everything ready to go, and we were about to shoot it, and then we heard a big pop, and basically the circuit for the 1200D popped, and we didn't have another outlet, so we had to shoot this with the Nova, and we put this at 100% and just risked it for the shot and got the rest of the shots. So this ended up blowing the breaker on the 1200D, and then we only had the Nova P300 at 50%, and we didn't really want to push it anymore, so we kind of had to roll with what we had. So originally I had this set up on the Ember with the 18mm, but then it wasn't wide enough because it was Super 35, and it wasn't really giving the look, the grandness that we're trying to finish off this piece. So we grabbed the BTS camera from our BTS operator Saya, grabbed the FX3, put the 12mm on, which we were using for other stuff just to have. Shot this at 240 frames per second because that's the fastest this camera can shoot at. Then I also shot of the second base ISO of the camera at 12,800 ISO, just to lift everything so we had enough information because we didn't have enough output here. So this was kind of a situation where we had so many things go wrong because of the outlet and then the lens choice, then everything just not looking how we intended to. And then we had to kind of think on our feet on what camera has a higher base ISO that we can lift the entire room, then we can bring this back in post. And that allows us to get a wider field of view with a 12mm lens, and it was the FX3. So kind of the FX3 kind of saved the shoot, but this was something that we had to fit quick on our feet because we only had like 5 minutes to get the shot. And the first time I shot this, we were soft, and we had to kind of relook at the image because we didn't have time to really build out the camera on a cinema setup. And then we had to shoot this a bunch of times just so that we got the shot and we had a peace of mind. But ultimately it turned out great, and it's not distinguishable between the other shots in the piece if we compare them. Obviously this is a wide shot and you can get away with a lot, but we are super happy with how it turned out. So big thing for myself that I learned from this commercial is that you have to kind of roll with the punches, and it's more important to get the shot on the world building aspect and what the scene is supposed to be, and not necessarily on a technical aspect. We had everything planned and everything ready to go, but there are things that are going to happen on set that you really can't account for, especially comes to location. And you have to look at the tools that you have access to and then use them to your disposal. If I didn't have the FX3 there, we wouldn't have got this final shot and it wouldn't have turned out how it was supposed to. This is an amazing camera, and this is till this day one of my favorite cameras I love to shoot on. You don't need the best camera. You don't need to be shooting on ARRI. You don't need to be shooting on a Venice. The Sony FX3 really pulled this off, and ultimately we could have pulled off the entire shoot with multiple Sony FX3s or just running with one.